Hello, 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 and welcome back to Climate Voters Tonight. This is our second episode, and we're so excited that you've joined us again. On tonight's show, we're going to cover the Virginia special election, talk public transit and electric buses, and finish up with how a final EPA rule ended up in the crosshairs of Senate Republicans. I'm your host, Peter Schleisman. Let's get started. So, great news. Last week, climate champion Jennifer McClellan won her special election in Virginia's 4th congressional district. With nearly 75% of the vote, she clobbered the competition. She's going to be the first black woman ever to represent the Commonwealth in Congress. McClellan is succeeding the late Congressman Donald McKeachin, and she's got big shoes to fill. He was 6'4". But he was also a staunch advocate for Virginians and an important voice on environmental justice. And she's up to the task. I was on the ground last week in Virginia, knocking on doors and talking to voters about her record. I was in awe by the enthusiasm and excitement that Virginians had for her historic candidacy and her policy achievements over the last 18 years in the state Senate. It's clear that Jen McClellan is a climate and environmental justice rock star, and she's looking to continue this work in Congress. She wants to build on Representative McKeachin's legacy by focusing on bold climate solutions that advance justice and ensure every Virginia community is healthy and prosperous. We are thrilled that McClellan is headed to Congress. EDF Action worked really hard to show up in a big way to help make it happen. Members just like you knocked on doors, made phone calls to turn out voters, and we caught up with Congresswoman-elect McClellan while on the campaign trail. In case you missed it, we got you covered. We'll drop a link in the chat if you're on Zoom, or the comments if you're on YouTube. All right, moving on. One of our members, Joy, commented during our pilot episode about how public transportation can help tackle the climate crisis. That inspired us to take a deeper dive into the topic. The good news? President Biden, working with the last Congress, made historic investments in public transportation through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. We're starting to see states and municipalities put that money to work. These robust investments will make a huge difference in our efforts to tackle climate change and clean up the air we breathe. And they will help us to build public transportation systems that meet the needs of communities across the country. This means improved reliability and accessibility, and more options to get around. In too many cities, we don't have a choice. The only option is to drive, but it doesn't have to be that way. We can increase access to reliable, dependable buses and trains to get us where we need to go safely. More options will reduce gasoline-powered vehicles on the roads and clean up our air. Of course, we still have a long way to go, especially if we're going to match some of the best public transportation systems in the world. Right now, the gold standard is Hong Kong, according to the Urban Mobility Readiness Index. But investments in transit are only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the investments the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law is making. The law also provides funding for electric buses, which will help to get dirty diesel buses off the roads. That will help clean up our air while saving city transportation officials money by reducing maintenance costs and breaking their reliance on oil and gas. That's a big deal. And it's why Vice President Harris was in St. Cloud, Minnesota recently, touting this important investment. She toured an electric bus manufacturer and talked about how electric buses are key to the future of public transportation in America.
Buses are our nation's most popular form of public transportation, and they are in desperate need of upgrade. The majority of our nation's buses run on diesel fuel. Well, here's the thing. Diesel exhaust is a poison. Diesel exhaust is also a greenhouse gas, but there is a solution to all of this, and that solution is parked right over there and right over there and right over there. These buses, electric buses. Electric buses are key to the future of public transportation in America, which is why, since taking office, together with Democrats and Republicans, we have invested over $5.5 billion to put thousands of new electric transit buses on the streets of our nation.
This is a transformative moment. And don't worry, on our social channels and right here on Climate Voters Tonight, we'll keep you informed about these investments in your communities. All right, moving on to the next segment of the night. In December, the Environmental Protection Agency finalized more protective standards to reduce nitrogen oxide, also known as NOx emissions, from medium and heavy-duty trucks. This is an updated rule, which could reduce harmful NOx emissions from medium and heavy-duty trucks by as much as 48% by 2045. This is a big deal in our quest to protect public health and clean up our air. But a group of 34 Republican senators have already introduced legislation trying to overturn this important safeguard. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with EDF Action's Emily Wurzba to get the 411 on the final rule and the congressional threat to it. So thanks for being here, Emily.
Yeah, thanks.
Emily is one of our experts on truck and vehicle policy. That sounds like the thing that I wanted to do when I was a kid. And she is going to help us answer some of these important questions. So first off, can you just tell us what an agency rule is?
Yes, thanks, Peter. So agencies actually have authority from Congress to issue regulations based on prior laws that have already been enacted. These rules are usually developed over many months and sometimes multiple years of scientific research, public input, and stakeholder engagement. And they set standards for any number of public health issues or problems affecting our society. So in this rulemaking, the EPA actually has authority under the Clean Air Act to set emission standards to protect public health.
Awesome, that's really interesting, thank you. So can you go into a little bit more detail about what's in the EPA's final rule on medium and heavy duty truck emissions?
Yeah, of course. So in December, the EPA finalized more protective standards to reduce NOx emissions from medium and heavy duty vehicles, beginning in model year 2027.
Okay.
So this is the first time these standards have been updated in 20 years, so It's a really big deal. And according to the EPA, they will reduce NOx emissions from trucks by 48% by 2045. So despite making up less than 10% of vehicles on the road, buses, trucks, and tractor trailers are actually the largest contributor to ozone-forming NOx emissions from all highway vehicles, and they're responsible for a significant amount of health-harming fine particulate matter and more than 420 million tons of climate pollution.
Oh my goodness.
So it's a lot. So NOx is also very harmful to public health, especially for infants and children and the elderly,
Sure.
And those who live closest to our nation's highways and roads and ports and freight depots. And the EPA has actually found that people of color and those with lower incomes are more likely to live near those truck routes. So in total, the EPA is estimating that these new protective NOx standards will keep more than 400,000 tons of pollution out of our air and prevent almost 3,000 deaths and numerous hospitalizations and respiratory illnesses each year by 2045. So you can see that these rules make a big difference.
Wow, well, it seems like a strong rule to me. So why is this group of senators trying to undo it?
Yeah, that's a big question. Some have raised concerns about the cost of these rules. However, these are issues that the EPA considered carefully, and our country already has a strong track record of innovating to deploy solutions that clean the air and grow jobs.
Right.
So in fact, major truck and engine manufacturers and labor representatives were there to support Administrator Regan's announcement of these new standards.
Okay.
So that's something. And the investment and the innovation in the trucking industry has really just begun. Besides just this rule, companies are spending tens of billions of dollars to manufacture and deploy medium and heavy duty zero-emitting vehicles, which will be creating thousands of jobs.
That's
another
fantastic.
really big
Yeah,
point.
right.
So also, we can't forget about the incentives that passed in the Inflation Reduction Act,
Of course.
which have changed the transportation landscape and will dramatically reduce the cost of these vehicles, delivering substantial savings to truckers and fleets over those vehicles' lifetime, and further underscoring the opportunity for protective standards. I'll also just add that these standards have broad support from labor, manufacturers, shippers and fleets, as well as consumer groups, environmental justice, health, and environmental organizations.
That's really interesting. So taking a step back, can you just talk a little bit about how a federal agency rule can, be subject to congressional review in the first place?
Yeah, that's an important question. So members of Congress can introduce what's called a Congressional Review Act resolution, which allows recently issued federal regulations to be overturned through a joint resolution with only a simple majority vote in both chambers and then a signature from the president. So Congress can vote on a CRA resolution on any regulation that has been finalized in the previous 60 legislative session days. And if it's passed both chambers and signed into law, the agency is unable to issue any rule that's substantially similar in the future.
Interesting, so it can't even be filibustered. Wow. So how can we take action to defend these limits on pollution from trucks and buses?
Yeah, so thankfully now is a key time to take action to defend these protective standards on NOx emissions. We expect that the Senate will vote on this CRA in the next few weeks, it could be as early as March. So now is a critical time to reach out to your senators and make sure you urge them to vote no on this resolution. Voting no is vital for protecting the health of our communities and cleaning up our air.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Emily. If you are interested in learning more about the EPA's clean truck standards, do check out the article. We're going to put it in the chat if you're watching this on Zoom or in the comments if you're on YouTube. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us, Emily, and you're welcome back anytime.
Great. Thanks so much, Peter.
Thanks. Thanks so much for that great interview, Emily. Well, I hope you don't have anything better to do tonight because you're in luck. We're going to add another segment to the show. While we can't go in depth on every topic during every episode, we can leave you with some headlines that stood out to us over the past 2 weeks. So let's dive right in. First, I'm sure you're all seeing the news about the East Palestine train derailment. EDF Action's Heather Toney talked about it in a CNN interview. Let's take a watch.
There's growing worry over the dangers toxic chemicals could pose in East Palestine, Ohio, after a freight trail derailed in the town early this month. Some residents say they've suffered headaches, rashes, sore throats, and other symptoms. And I am joined now by Heather Toney, Vice President of Community Engagement for the Environmental Defense Fund. Heather, thank you so much for joining us. I see that we got the memo and we're all wearing blue today. What is your biggest concern right now for people in this area, especially those who are complaining of symptoms?
You know, East Palestine is like so many communities all around this country that are connected by railway. And it's so concerning that not only are we dealing again with another tragedy of a train derailment, it's in community where there are children, their families, and that people are very concerned about what they're smelling, they're seeing, they're feeling, and how we're measuring and monitoring that exposure is extremely important. So when we think about the chemicals that we know have been released, they are known carcinogens. Vinyl chloride is a carcinogen. And when it's burned, you get phosgene, which again is something that is not only a known carcinogen, but we have to look at the health impacts to our vulnerable populations. And that's what worries me. It is looking at the impacts to children, to elderly, to our pregnant women, and women of childbearing age. We should definitely closely monitor not only their health impacts, but really look to see what the exposure was and how many of those persons were actually exposed.
Second, don't forget that on March 28th, the deadline for comments on stronger protections for soot pollution are due. If you haven't yet, please submit those comments at edfaction.org/soot. And if you don't know what to write, join us on March 3rd for a training session on how to write good public comments. The event link is in the chat. Additionally, if you've already submitted a comment, you can reach out to us about writing a letter to the editor to show your support. Additionally, during Black History Month, we're profiling Congressional Black Caucus members and their climate policy initiatives. Check out our social channels on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and Facebook to learn more. Last, but certainly not least, Ford made a $3.5 billion investment in EV batteries in Michigan. Our organizer on the ground, Tina, had this to say: "My home and my heart will always be in Michigan. This battery plant will help slash pollution and bring good-paying jobs back to my community." All right, I want to thank you once again for tuning into Climate Voters tonight. As always, we want to hear directly from you. That's why we're asking you to submit your questions to us at the link in the chat or the comment section, or go to edfaction.org/questions. This way, we'll be able to focus our programming on the issues you care most about. Together, we're creating a climate movement strong enough to transform our economy, create millions of good-paying clean energy jobs, protect the health of our communities, and achieve a sustainable future for us all. Climate Voters Unite.